It's Tuesday, that means another episode of 2-Minute Tech Tuesdays. I'm Thijs, the technical evangelist at Varnish Software, and in this episode we'll be looking at Dynamic Backends. As usual, we put 2 minutes on the timer. Let's get started. Traditionally, backends in Varnish are defined in the VCL file using a static backend definition. Host and port information is also static, and any DNS name that is used will be resolved at compile time. The same applies when using multiple backends to perform load balancing. The association between the backend and the director object in charge of load balancing is also done statically. This approach has some severe limitations. Because DNS is resolved at compile time, any runtime changes in terms of DNS are not noticed by Varnish. If your IP address changes while Varnish is running, it will not know. Also, a hostname can only have a single IP address. If your hostname uses multiple IP addresses for DNS-based load balancing, that is out of the question. And lastly, it is not possible to define ad hoc backends using runtime information. And that's exactly where dynamic backends come into play. Through Varnish Enterprise's go-to vmod, you can define them, and they offer some clear benefits. First of all, you can use DNS records with multiple IP addresses and perform DNS-based load balancing. If DNS records tend to change every now and then, that is also supported. So if you have a dynamic inventory, potentially in the cloud, vmod goto is the perfect module for you. And finally, you can define backends at runtime and use all kinds of input to locate the backend. Here's a code example that shows you how to get started with DNS-based load balancing. You import the goto vmod, you still have to define a static backend, but in this case it's an empty one, and then you initialize a director object through goto.dnsdirector. Instead of defining it statically, whatever IP address is linked to backend.example.com is used and can be refreshed. If multiple IP addresses are used, the director object will cycle through them every time you call api-pool.backend. Here's another code example where we define an ad hoc backend. We can do that using goto.dns backend, and whatever hostname is entered will be resolved. It could use runtime variables, could even use a string. Whatever hostname is returned will be resolved to its IP address. If multiple IP addresses are used, we will cycle through them. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I also hope you appreciate how significant of a feature Dynamic Backends is. I'll be back next Tuesday with more tech on Tuesday in 2 minutes or less.